Hi, this is a supplementary lecture from week 8 on an introduction to optimization, which is just really a survey of mathematical programming using Excel Solver. We're going to basically just do a few examples, and I want to show you basically where this can be used and a few examples of how it can be used. Okay, and hopefully this will give you confidence to try it out yourself, which is really the key to doing all this stuff. Optimization, linear programming, these are all fantastic tools, and you have to practice them to be able to do them and to be able to see the value of using this tool. So just want to get you a little bit comfortable with that. So let's get started. Here are the objectives, and we are going to talk a little bit about optimization problems in general, but mostly we're going to be focusing on using Excel Solver add-in to do this. So first of all, what is optimization? I think we all have an idea of what optimization is, but essentially what we're talking about here is we're going to be talking about the technique in the context of the following. That is, make some objective function, whatever that is, whether it's the amount of pain that a patient feels, or whether it's the efficiency of a process, or whether it's the profit of sales on a product. We're going to try and make some objective function of that, either maximized, minimized, or set to a specific target. Generally speaking, we'll want to maximize or minimize it. And here's the kicker. We're often working, and this is what makes it so relevant, we're often working in a situation, in a business where there are lots of different constraints. Constraints on labor that we have, constraints on time that we have, constraints on all kinds of things, on work assignments. So I want to show you how to use Excel's free tool to help you do some of this stuff. Here are some examples. For example, an emergency room might want to allocate its fixed resources so that maximizes treatment availability. So here we have constraints on the resources, and availability is what we're trying to maximize. Another company is considering 10 strategic IT projects that tie up resources over the next 2 years. How do they maximize return on investment given a fixed number of resources? Very common problem. Wouldn't we like to have an objective, rational way of solving that? Number 3, a retailer wants to price its goods to maximize profits. Number 4, a warehouse wants to minimize its inventory on hand without increasing the chance of a stock out. Very common. So we might have constraint on the stock outs, probability, but we want to minimize our inventories. Finally, a care delivery center wants to minimize expired drugs without increasing the likelihood of having a drug on hand for its patients. I'm thinking of maybe an oncology practice right there, right, where it's critical to have enough drugs so that when patients come in for chemo, you can deliver it. But drugs are expensive to mix, and if we mix them up and they expire, bad news, high cost. All right, so all of these have, and there are plenty of other examples, from travel and scheduling to project selection, lots of different things. They all have in common, we're going to try and select the best way of doing something given certain constraints. Now, one of the things about this technique is, well, let's go through an example. So specifically, if we're going to maximize or minimize something, consider the following. Consider a backpacker and wants to maximize the value of what she takes on a trip while limiting herself to less than 50 pounds in gear because you can only carry a certain amount on your back. So here the objective function would be the sum of the values of each piece of camping gear. So notice that we'd have to somehow assume that we know the values or calculate those values. So what is the value of having a Swiss Army knife, for example, or what is the value of having a tin of baked beans, or something like that. And then it's also assumed that we know the weights of each of these things. So we know the weight of the Swiss Army knife, and we know the weight of the bottle of water, and we know the weight of the gorp that she's going to take along, good old raisins and peanuts that she's going to take along. and so forth. So formally and mathematically, what we're doing is we're maximizing this sum, which x's would be the values, subject to the sum of the w's, the weights, would be less than 50 pounds. Simple as that. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to let Excel solve it for us. Now there will be some tricks along the way, and it'll be kind of fun to discover those tricks, I think. Here's where we're talking about right here. Go to my pen, and I'll change the pen color here. I'm feeling in a magenta mood today. So we're talking about optimization right here. And for this, it's also, by the way, it's also called mathematical programming, and there's a number of different ones: integer, linear, nonlinear. The good news is that Excel Solver doesn't really care. It just solves them. Okay? Now the key is that, yes, we're dealing, and understanding this, is that we have to make very strong, not assumptions, but I guess assumptions about what we know. So when we know a lot, this can be about prices, about weights, about things like that. This can be an excellent thing to use. When we're really making a lot of uncertain questions, we might want to use more statistical methods. Let's go through an example, and this example is given on the optimization spreadsheet on yours. I'll just follow it on this. Here we have but we'll do a couple of specific examples directly in there as well. Okay, so here we have a peripheral manufacturer. They make mice, they make keyboards, they make USB hubs, and they want to maximize their monthly profit. Seems like a reasonable thing to do. The only problem is they have constraints on their labor, how many hours they can put in, and they have constraints on the demand in the market. So how can we, and on also on the available time in production hours. So a certain unit takes up production time on the factory floor, but also it takes up a certain amount of labor, and there's only so much demand for it. So how do we maximize maximize profit given these constraints? The monthly available hours, 10,000. Labor hours, 10,000. Available monthly production, 1,700. And we don't want to exceed the demand of the market. How can we do that? Well, we're going to use Excel Solver, and I'll show you how to put that in. But essentially, we set up a spreadsheet that looks kind of like this. We'll have each of our, here's our table right here, and we'll want to maximize our profits, so we'll set it up so that we have profits here, and we want to make sure that we don't that we don't go over the demand. Well, the first thing that we might do is we might see, well, if maybe we can stick in exactly demand. What if we could make exactly that much in a given month? But the problem is, it turns out that we exceed the labor and the shop floor constraints. So let's go ahead and add those in, and if we do that, hold on, I think it's going to be better if we actually do this in Excel, and I'll show you how to do it directly. Okay, so here's the file in Excel, and just to show you what you're going to need to do to use the solver, first of all, you need to set up a spreadsheet where you have your objective function. So here's our objective function. I'm going to call that, I'm going to just label that as green so we can see what it is. Maybe a different color green there. That's a little bright, but okay. So that's our objective function, and you can see it's just the sum of the profit times the monthly demand. So if these are the things that we're changing, here's our profit. This is just the sum of the product of these two. So what would it be to make 12,000 mice plus 20,000 keyboards plus 9,000 USB hubs and so forth? Turns out it's 328. What would that mean in terms of the labor? Well, it's just the sum of the product of the labor that it's going to count. That's going to be. Okay, and finally the time. Right, so it's 20,000, right? So the labor is 12,000 times 2 plus 0.2 plus 20,000 times 0.3 hours, and so forth. And the shop time is these guys times the number of production units. So what we're going to do is we're going to play around with these things until we get an answer that's maximized. So the first thing that we would say is, well, what happens if we plug in the maximums right here? Okay, and you can see that it gives us this profit. And what would happen if we then go to 18,000 keyboards? Well, we're meeting this constraint, but we're still not meeting that constraint. So let's just put in this. Not quite there yet. Let me put in 15,000 and so forth. Now, this would meet the constraints. You see that? So when I put in these numbers, it meets the constraints. But is this the maximum profit that we can get while meeting these constraints? Let's let Excel figure it out, okay? So let's open up the solver. The solver you can get by going to the add-ins, and you'll have a checkbox right there. Now, if you don't have the solver in there, you'll need to browse for the solver and do that. If you're in Excel 97, you just need to add the solver from the list of available macros. We'll do the next example in Excel 2007, not 97, 2007. So you'll see it. Here we've already got the solver in, so I'm going to go ahead and use it. All right, so let's start from the start and walk it through. So first of all, we need to have an objective function. That's our target cell. That's this guy right there. You can see that's H15. Second of all is we need to determine whether it's a max, min, or a target. In this case, we want to maximize it. It's a profit. Here are the cells that we want to change, and you'll notice it's D, E, and F18. It's these guys right there. And then finally, the real key to this is the constraints. So we're going to add these different constraints. First of all of these, the most important constraint is that all of these guys right here, right, these guys right here, need to be less than or equal to this right here. Okay, so far so good. Second of all is that E18 needs to be less than E20. What is that? So E18 is less than or equal to E20. Oh, I'm sorry, this one is less than this one is less than this one, and then this one is less than that one. Those are the first three. And then the last two constraints, this one and this one, are both related to these over here. H17 needs to be less than I17, so remember that's the labor hours, and this needs to be less than 1,700. Okay? So once we've got that, let's go ahead and let's let Excel go ahead and make that solution. So click on the Solve button. Excel will work a little bit, and it will give us an answer. And there it is. It comes up with a solution that says this is the maximum, and we'll notice that the constraints are indeed satisfied. So that's how it works. That's it. That's it. Pretty straightforward. The hard part is setting up the spreadsheet. So let's go to a couple more, and we'll see how that works. All right. Let's go on to another one here, and this is a pretty common one. Here we're going to try and find an optimal schedule. So here we've got a care delivery center that's open 7 days a week. The number of workers needed on each day to meet patient demand is given on the spreadsheet, and it's actually right here. So consider like you've got maybe a convenient care clinic or something like that, and to meet the given demand, you need this many people staffed on each day. So fewer people on Sunday, Saturday, and Friday, but many people on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. How should we staff this? Subject to the constraint that workers work on 5 consecutive days. So if they start on Monday, they'll work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If they start on Tuesday, they'll work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, etc. Okay, so that's the constraint. Okay, here's our spreadsheet. It's called Workforce. And what we've got here is our spreadsheet setup. And what we want to do is we want to minimize the total number of workers given that so many start on Monday, so many start on Tuesday, so many start on Wednesday, and so forth. Well, now notice that if you start on Monday, you'll work Monday, Tuesday. I've set up this matrix where it says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday you work, but you don't work Saturday, Sunday. If you start on Tuesday, you'll work these days, but not on Sunday, etc. Okay? So that's what's going on there. All right. And here might be our initial guess. Now, another way of doing that, let me put in maybe a more dumb guess. What if I wanted to say, well, I had 16 people start on Monday, and that's all I had. Well, obviously that's going to work for these, or for these days, but it's going to fail on Saturday, Sunday. So maybe we'll have 8 people start on Saturday. Well, if we do that, look at what we've got. We've got a tremendous amount of overstaffing on all of these days. On Friday, we're overstaffed, right? 16 instead of 8. And on Monday, we've got, look at the overstaffing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Just tremendous. So that might not be a good solution, and so we might want to change that up a little bit. Okay, instead of R doing it, let's let Excel find it. And so I'm just going to put in some sort of semi-random numbers in here. We'll do 16 there, and maybe 10 there, and 10 there, and 5 here, or something like that, and maybe that'll actually work. Looks like we've got enough. I'm not sure that's a good number, but we'll just put it in there. And now let's go ahead and enter in our parameters in the solver. This time I'm going to start from scratch. So I'll delete a couple here. And let's delete this. So the first thing is we need to change the objective function. Here the objective function is this target. We want to minimize it, not maximize it. And we want to change the cells, these guys right there. Okay, we're changing these in order to see what happens there. Okay, now we have to add the constraints. So the real constraints are that these number working are greater than or equal to right there. Now here's a shortcut. Remember last time we did it one at a time. Here we're going to do it all at once, because otherwise it would really be tough to do. So our cell references, these have to be greater than or equal to these right here. Okay? Let's add that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it solve this, and we're going to run into a problem, and you'll see the problem right away. And this is one of the things that can happen when you're using the solver. It's okay. No harm, no foul. You just figure it out, and over time you get better at it. So we're going to make an instructive mistake here. Let me go ahead and do this. Looks like we're all set. And look what it found, however. I'm going to keep the solver solution for just a moment. It changed these, but look, it made some negative numbers. Now, I don't know about you, but we can't start -3 people on Wednesday. It doesn't make any sense. So we're either going to have to fix it as greater than 0 or something like that. Okay? So let's do our the other thing is, if you look carefully, yeah, it's actually creating things that are non-integers. So it says start 5.6 people on Thursday. So we're going to have to fix that to be an integer too. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to add another constraint that these must be integers. I'll add that. And I'll add the last constraint that these must be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, let's click OK, and there they are. So when you add them, they add to the top. Maybe they add alphabetically. Okay, looks like we've got it all. All right, let's go ahead and solve it. Bam, there it is. It finds that if we start 3 people on Monday, 2 people on Wednesday, 2 people on, Wednesday, 2 people on Thursday, 1 person on Friday, 3 people on Saturday, and 7 people on Sunday, that's one of the minimum solutions. Now, it turns out that it's not the only minimum solution, but it is a minimum solution. Okay? So, for example, if we started out with a slightly different take, like let's say we had 7 there, and let's make this 0, and let's add maybe make that 4 and 5 here, or something like that. I'll let it go. We may not get exactly the same answer for these, but we will get the same minimum. So sometimes you can play around a little bit with that. Sometimes there's more than one way to skin a cat, is I guess the way you put it. Yeah, so another way of getting 18 would be to start 10 on Monday, 2 on Tuesday. So sometimes you can run it a couple of times. There is a report in here called the sensitivity report, which you'll see. See, now it comes up with that other solution where there's some sensitivity that we can look in there. There's some answer reports, and it'll tell you a little bit about that. But generally speaking, if you run it a couple of times, it'll give you maybe 1 or 2 different answers. That's okay. Sometimes you can find different ways to maximize something. All right. So that's a little trick, the trick of the 1s and 0s. Let me show you one more. There's a good example with a legal firm. That's given in here in the exercises. Find the best allocation of resources to minimize the work order. Let's go through this one. Actually, let's go through 2 more. So let's go through this one with the legal firm. So here we're going to find. Let's take a look at that. We want to minimize the total number of work hours with no junior partner taking more than 1 case. How could your answer differ if lawyer 2 would not take a certain case? Okay. So so anyway, here we've got a senior partner, and he's going to dole out responsibility of 5 cases to 5 junior partners. How should he best do it? We want to minimize the total hours. I guess maybe if you work for this law firm, maybe you want to maximize the total hours. Sounds anyway. I'm not. You know what? I'm not going to fall into making lawyer jokes. That's in bad taste. So one of the ways that I've written this is I've made. You'll see that I've made a matrix here, and this matrix shows that if I take 1 case for each junior partner, right here's junior partner 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a total number of cases, case 1, case 2, and so forth. And so we'll also have to put in another constraint or 2 in here. Each lawyer can take only 1 case, and there's this. All right. So let's go to it. There's a couple of instructive mistakes here that we'll make as well. So the objective function is this guy. Which cells am I going to change? Well, I get to change all of these cells right here, J3 to N7. Oops, messed up. These cells right there. And what are the constraints? Well, each one of these guys has to be less than, let's see. Each one of these guys has to be less than or equal to 1. They all have to be equal to integers. They all have to be greater than or equal to 0. And all of this, J through M, has to be equal to 1. Now we could also put a sum over here and make sure that that sum is never greater than 1, but it turns out that that's unnecessary. Let's go ahead and hit the solve button. And in fact, we find out that for, and we'll keep this, we find out that this is our solution. If we assign lawyer number 1 to case 1, lawyer number 2 to case 2, 3 to case 3, and lawyer number 2 is being assigned to case 2, case 4, and case 5. So we've got to put in a constraint that keeps us from over-assigning on that. Well, one way of doing that would be, let's just sum up over here this row, right? And one of the things that we can say is that all these have to be equal to 1. Right? The sums of all these have to be equal to 1. So we'll put a constraint on that. Put a solver. We'll add the constraint. All these are equal to 1. Okay? Oops. There it is right there. So this all has to be 1, but this all has to be 1 too. Now let's go ahead and solve it. Notice it took a little bit of time to do that, and it came to the answer. Now, if you're noticing here, it doesn't quite come to 0. It comes to 10 to the minus 11th, but that's pretty close to 0, right? Okay. All right. So that's pretty interesting. It says lawyer 1 gets assigned case 5, lawyer 2 gets assigned case. These are essentially 0, so I'll put them in that way. Lawyer 2 would be assigned to a case 1. Lawyer 3 assigned to a case 2, 3, 4 to 4, and 5 to case 2. Okay. So now what if we had, now in the book it says, what if lawyer 2 would not be assigned to case 5? Well, no problem, he isn't. But what if we didn't want to assign him to 1? How would we find that solution? Now notice, when we added this constraint, it added hours on there. That often happens. We were able to get to 427 before. Now it's 443. Let's see if we can get it even. Let's see if we can take into account. Suppose lawyer 2 would not take on case 1. So I'll just show that in red. Well, that's a little too bright for me. How about light orange? There we go. How about, okay, this guy right there. What if this had to be equal to 0? We still had these constraints, but he would not take on this. That's pretty straightforward. We'll just add that constraint that that's equal to 0. We'll add that constraint that this cell is equal to 0, and go for it. And there it is. It solves. Whoops, hold on a second. Okay, let's do the example on exercise 2. We're going to restart this. Let's do the example on exercise 2, which is optimization for a legal firm. And here we want to find the best allocation of resources, minimizing the work orders, given that only that 5 junior cases, I'm sorry, in the background is you have a senior partner who estimated how much time each of 5 cases would take 5 other junior partners given their expertise and experience. So some junior partners could have experience in one particular area and thus do a case more efficiently, and so forth. And so what we want to do is we want to minimize Excel Solver. Using Excel Solver, we want to minimize the work hours given the constraint that no junior partner can take more than 1 case. And then let's also look into what would happen if a specific lawyer or junior partner wouldn't be able to take a certain case for one reason or other, maybe conflict of interest or who knows what. So let's take a look at that. And I'm going to open up optimization and go to legal firm. So here, what we've got is we've got the here are the hours that the senior partner estimated each lawyer would take on each case. And down here then, what I've got is I've got a table that would say, well, if we assign lawyer 5 to case 1, how much would that be, and so forth. You can see that this is the sum product of this times this, and this would be the sum This would be the sum product of this times this, and so forth. Sum product is a great, if you don't know sum product in Excel, get to know it because it's a really good function, and so forth. So what it does is it multiplies everything in this matrix. Let me put a 0 there and a 0 there, by what it is above there. And we might want to even start out as just saying, well, let's assign lawyer 1 to case 1, lawyer 2 to case 2, and so forth. So where are the other constraints? Well, the other constraints, oops, let me put that as a 1. That, you know what, I'll even put in some things that violate these constraints. The other constraint is that we only want to have one lawyer per case, and we want to make sure that each lawyer only gets one case, can't get 2, and so forth, right? So we can't assign lawyer 1 to cases 1 and 3 and lawyer 4 to nothing. So those are the two constraints that we want to put in. Third constraint is that this table has to be all binary, or all 1s and 0s. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like in Solver and use Excel Solver to solve it. See if we can do better than 720 hours. Actually, let's go from a real baseline. So I don't want to assign anybody more than one case. And this might be just assign 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3. That's 492 hours. Can we do better than that? Here it is. We want to minimize this target cell by changing cells. Lawyers, that's this guy right here. Notice I put a label on this, but those are the cells. And we want the subject to the constraints that this is equal to that. This right here is equal to 1. This right here is equal to 1. And all of these cells in yellow are either 1s and 0s. That's the binary. Okay. So let's go ahead and let it rip. See what we get. And there it is. Excel came up with a solution, and we're going to keep it, that says assign lawyer 5 to case 1, lawyer 4 to case 2, lawyer 3 to case 3, lawyer 2 to case 4, and lawyer 1 to case 5, and it comes up to 436 hours. Quite an improvement, almost 60-hour improvement. So that's quite a bit. Now, what would happen if we wanted to say, I'm going to get rid of that. That's so bright. Oh, that's a little better. What would happen if for some reason, suppose lawyer 1 had a conflict of interest on case 5? And we'd say, well, lawyer 1 can't take on case 5. How would we do that? Well, now we can say that we're just going to force this particular cell, which I'll mark as maybe bright orange, as equal to 0. So let's just add that constraint that this cell is equal to 0. Oops, not 0 minus. And there it is right there. Go ahead and click the solver. The solver sometimes has problems with this, so you might want to start going back from a, see, it didn't actually solve it. It does happen once in a while that solver has problems. So what you might want to do is, let's just go back to our original, which was this. Right, this was our baseline. There's the, oops, I've got one extra somewhere. There it is right there. This is our baseline, 492. And now let's see if Solver should be able to do this. And yep, it did come up with a solution, and it said put lawyer 1 in case 4. So essentially just switch lawyer 1 and lawyer 2's cases. And it doesn't do quite as well. It comes up with 446, which was more than 436, but at least it avoids that conflict of interest. Okay, let me do one more example. I think that you'll find this illuminating. I hope so. We'll skip over exercise 3 and we'll do exercise 4, which is on capital budgeting. So we're going to use a data and optimization capital budget to find the best set of projects that maximize net present value. So in this case, the problem that we have is we only have so many labor hours to do it, and we only have so much budget to do it. Okay? So there's budget that's in here, and there's labor. So how do we maximize the ROI given all of that? This is a pretty cool problem, a pretty common problem. So here's what we have right here. Here's the available budget. You can think of these maybe in thousands of dollars. So here are the different projects 1 through 20. Here's a net present value of all of them. How do we know this? Well, there's a business case written for each of these, and we're assuming that the business case is good and all that. So yes, there are assumptions behind here. Here's the cost, or the budget, the amount of budget in each year. Here's the amount of labor available in year 1, 2, 3. And we don't want to exceed any of this in any of the years. Okay, so let's think through this in general. If we were a company with infinite money, since all of these projects have positive net present value, we'd want to do them all. So let's look at the total. Let's just look at this total number of projects. So here I've got 20 projects, and I've selected 12. And then here I'm going to equal the sum of, or I should say sum product of this array and this array. Not disarray, okay? All right, and now let's make all these ones. Okay, so if we ran all 20 projects, this is what we would have. We'd have a $15 million, let's put that in dollars. There we go. $15 million return. The problem is maybe if we do all this, we would exceed the costs in year 1, 2, 3, or whatever. So let's see if that's true. Equals sum product of this array, comma, this array, and I'm going to show you a shortcut in just a moment so we don't have to do this every time. Okay, so right away we see that that's a problem because we're exceeding the budget in year 1. So we're going to have to figure out a better way of doing this. But anyway, let me show you how to do this so we'll look at it all the way across. I'm going to bind this and make it, when you use dollar signs, you fix that so when you copy it over, it's no longer a relative reference. This is an absolute reference in Excel. I'm going to go ahead and do that, copy it over, and there it is. Let's just make sure. Yep, so this is this row times this first, and this is this row times this first one. Good. So let's take a look at it. Well, clearly, we're exceeding everything. We're exceeding the budget every year. We're exceeding the labor every year, so we can't do all the projects. Okay. So which ones do we choose to maximize the ROI? Let's use the solver to see if we can do that. So let's go into solver. Okay. So it says that the target cell needs to be this one. That's our target cell. You know what? Let's just mark some of these. Here's our target cell. I'm going to mark that in green. That's not a bright enough green. How about this green? Color of money. What's the color of money? I like the other one better. There's color of money. Okay, there's my green. I'll bold it even. Okay, and then here are my constraints. Right? I need all of these to be less than all of these. Right? So let's see if we can maximize those. And here's what I'm choosing to change. Here are my change cells. So I'm changing all of these guys right there. Right? And then when I change these, you'll see, you know, it goes up or down or whatever. And I want to satisfy those constraints. So let's go ahead and do that. Yes, I know. And I'm just going to delete all these because I think it'll be instructive to actually make this happen. So the first thing is I want to make sure that my target cell is right. So I'm going to click the target cell. I want to maximize it. And which cells do I want to change? I want to change these. Okay. Subject to the following constraints. All right, the first thing that we ought to know is these are either ones or zeros. So an easy way to do that is to say, well, let's add this, is to say these are binary. We could say they're integers equal to 0 or equal to 1, but let's just use the shortcut and do that. Okay, so all those have to be binary. And then we have to have all these have to be less than or equal to this. So let's add that. These must be less than or equal to these. Now we can name these things if we wanted to, but like we could call these do the project, and we can call this vector cost, and we can call this labor, and we can actually hardwire it in there so that when we go back later, we'll see that it's cost and labor constraints and all that kind of stuff. All right, is that it? I think so. Let's go ahead and hit the solver. And you'll notice that now it's taking a little bit longer. The solver, when it does more difficult problems, this is a more difficult problem for it, it might take a little time. So here we're up to trial 100, 150. Uh-oh, it's struggling a little bit. All right, so it found some solution. And by the way, if it doesn't find a solution and it iterates a lot, it'll stop and it'll tell you after a while. So let's keep this solution. And it looks like it found a solution that's maximized at around 9.3 million. And here are the projects that it would run. It would run project 2, project 3, etc. And if we look down here, we notice that the budget, it's all within budget and it's all within labor. Pretty slick, huh? All right. Let's ask two more questions. What would happen if project 3 was selected, that we would have to select project 4? So right here, for example, I mean, and we all have that, right? Where we have projects that only make sense if other projects are selected. So here's an example of a situation that we wouldn't allow. If project 3 were selected, we would also have to select project 4. How could we put that in the constraints? Well, one way of doing it would be to say, let me add this in, that this number, this cell for project 3, had to be less than or equal to this. Now I'm going to go through why that's true in just a second. Let me just hit the solver button and we'll wait and we'll get it going. So here's why it's true. If I had a 1 for project 3 and a 1 for project 4, that would be okay. If I had a 0 for project 3 and a 0 for project 4, that would be okay. And if I had a 0 for project 3 and a 1 for project 4, that would be okay. The only thing that's bad or not allowed would be a 1 for project 3 and a 0 for project 4. That is, I do project 3, but I don't do project 4. I could certainly do them both. I could do neither. Or I could do project 4 alone, but I couldn't do 3 without doing 4. And that's what we have right here. It says do them both. And if you do them both along with these other constraints, there you go. 9.1 million. A little bit less, so it's not quite as good as the other, and so forth. Finally, let's look into the last one. Suppose that projects 1 through 10 were different. Now, I'll mark them as different. Were different than projects 11 through 20. Maybe these pertain to a specific area like compliance, and these pertain to a different area like billing or something like this. What happens if we had the constraint that we're only allowed to do 4 projects from 1 to 10? What would that? How would we do that? Well, we can just add in a sum right there, and this is projects 1 through 10, and that tells me how many, and we know that that has to be less than or equal to 4. If we're only allowed to run 4 projects of these first 10, how can we add that constraint in? That's, again, pretty straightforward. We just add. Now this needs to be less than or equal to this. Hit OK, and solve away again. Takes a little bit longer maybe to do this one. And there you go. it came up with something that was a little bit less, 8.9 million. So putting on all these different constraints, yes, they restrict the possibilities that we have, and you can see how that all works. All right. Well, hopefully this has been illuminating and hopefully fun. We did talk about some fundamental aspects of optimization and how to use Excel Solver to do all of these things. We don't have to know a lot about the background. What you need to be able to do is you need to be able to be intrepid about this, and you need to be creative especially when you're considering constraints. But super powerful tool, really fun tool to be able to play with, and I hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. All right, take care. We'll see you next time.